I'm Bruce Apar, and if I were a house, I'd have a thatched roof. And you're watching Frank Talks with Bruce the Blog, Talks with Frank.
Now this is empty space and it'll come back on again.
Frank Talks with Bruce the Blog is brought to you by Chase Media Group, publisher of The Penny Saver and other multimedia marketing solutions for an omnichannel marketplace. And we have a different kind of show today because my co-host, Frank J. Rich, is our guest. And we're going to be talking about a new children's book that Frank has written called If I Were a House. And we're also extremely pleased to have Frank's mom, Lisette Rich, with us today. So it's sort of a family affair, you might say, and I'm part of the family, part of Chase Media Group as well. And so, Frank, I know this is not the first book you've written, and in fact, we've talked on the show about that book, which is called Raising Father, which is a literary fiction novel and serious, very serious topic and high-minded. And so now you've gone over to a very different type of genre, children's book, poetry that's illustrated. Was there a plan there that you had this certain path you wanted to take, going from one to the other?
No, the simple answer is that there was not a plan. I think a writer writes and because he's compelled to, and so as you well know, having written many things, when you feel the urge, what motivates that in that moment has a lot to do with what the product looks like ultimately.
Right.
The novel is is a serious novel drama.
Right. With a message.
With a message,
yeah, right.
And I think most things you write have a message.
Right.
I think I have children. I had children late in life. I always had an affinity for them. I spent a lot of time with children even before I had my own children, in organized groups
right.
of young children. I think children have the essential innocence that brings out the joy in us, and I think they're a good model to use to
right.
communicate the principles and practices to use as a learning device, so to speak. And so there's a lot that we can learn in talking about and profiling children. Later in the discussion, perhaps we go to the last page in the book, which there is also a poem. But
right.
it speaks to the adults, the parents,
right.
and but it speaks to them about what we learn from our children.
Right. And the whole premise of If I Were a House, and you know how I love words like you do, and this word that I hate only because I hate to pronounce it, anthropomorphize, right? And that may not even be the right pronunciation, but basically the conceit of the book is that the house is talking, or the house. Well, you explain it. You're the author.
No, I think you explained it well.
Sure, yeah.
Well, it's a personification. The
right.
house becomes a person, so to speak.
Right.
It speaks to the children by saying, "If I were a house, then this is what I would be like for you. How
right.
I would prepare myself," and that's what it really the story is about.
And so, what would you say in this case with this work? Is the message to children, or let's say to parents or teachers who would be reading it to children, what's the message as far as you're concerned that you would like to come through?
Well, I think it's just a lot of normal messages about a lot of messages about normal life, and I think normal life is any kind of style that causes children to feel comfortable and welcomed, safe, excited, free, all of those kinds of things to do what they want to do. I think that's really the message. There's nothing extraordinary or deep about the message.
Right.
So, yeah.
And actually, I just at this point, I would like to ask your mom. Did Frank used to, when he was young, young boy, write out things? And,
Well, the big thing was vocabulary.
Okay, right.
He loved.
Was always
We
great with
both
vocabulary.
did.
Oh, you too.
And
yeah.
every day he would come home with a list of words.
Oh,
and
wow.
he'd say, "I bet you don't know the meaning of this one," and I would, and he'd be so angry, to think that.
Well, she had
Right.
an advantage. She speaks a language, another language close to Latin, and so she could decode the words.
Then
more
it
mean
was
easily.
Italian,
clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, but I think that's great.
Yeah,
I think some of us at least would like to see more of that going on with today's students or
Yeah.
young people,
Yeah.
like a love of language and words that
yeah.
I'm not sure is there the same way maybe it used to be. But actually, Frank, maybe at this point it would be good to read the story so
Oh,
people
sure.
can hear, your art, and it has beautiful illustrations. Who are the illustrations by?
The illustrator is a young man, Mitchell Janning, whom I have known since his birth. He's a son of a good friend, and his father is an extraordinary artist and inventor, and Mitch, as he's called, took after him, as does his sister,
Oh.
who is actually illustrating the next two books in the trilogy. So they're
really?
a very
Yeah.
artistic family,
Yeah.
and it's a joy to work with him. He's also a godchild of mine.
Oh, wow.
And he just has a natural way in which to communicate the emotion of the child in this story,
Right.
or the children in this story.
Yeah, no, his illustrations are something. They're very striking. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, he's a good artist.
Yeah, no, you can see that. It's state of the art. Oh, state of the art art.
Art, yeah.
So, yeah. So why don't we
Sure.
start, and then I know, thanks to our director Richard Redmond, we're going to be able to show everybody Mitchell Janning's illustrations as Frank is reading from his book If I Were a House, which, by the way, we should just mention is printed by Chase Media Group.
Absolutely.
Yeah, published and
Yeah,
printed
published
by
and printed by
Media
Chase Media
yeah.
Group.
Okay, it begins with the words, "If I were a house, I'd welcome you, 'cause little boys and girls are tried and true. They tear through rooms in a fit each day, touching everything along the way. If I were a house, I'd bend and move so that little ones chasing round would feel my groove. They'd know that I was on their side with lots of secret corners where they could hide. I'd only dim the lights at night or when the sun was low. I'd open all the shades, I would, so little ones would know how safe it is to be with me and happy in my space. I'd make it so they'd never want to leave this happy place. You might say, you're just a little house, but I'm as happy as a little mouse, 'cause I've got so much to give when you come inside me to live. I'd make it so it's warm at night and warm the days too with early light, 'cause little boys and girls rise early in the morn, and in their waking faces we'd seldom see a scorn. I'd make sure there's a puppy to lick your tears away when sometimes you turn a corner and something's in the way, and you get hurt and even maybe cry, 'cause it's no fun to fall. He'd find you when that happens and lick you till you're tall. I'd make sure there was lots of food that you really like to eat. I'd carpet all the floors so that you won't hurt your feet. I'd make sure all the windows were real low so you could see when Daddy's coming home at night, so that you and he were free To start your nightly wrestling and toss the ball outside, I'd make sure that your bikes were near so that you could take a ride with Dad and Mom and Sis along, and maybe Nevins too. He'd run around the bikes and bark the way dogs like to do. I'd make sure that next to me was a green grass yard to play in. I'd fill it full of toys you like and a little pond to wade in. I'd make sure there's a hill to climb and kids next door for fun. I'd make sure it was safe to play and safer still to run. I'd build a special tree house with stairs and roof and doors, and a cottage full of kitchen stuff for Sis on shiny wooden floors. I'd make sure there were trees outside for climbing and for shade. I'd make sure there were things around like frogs and books to trade. My bedrooms would be soft and warm with beds that melt away when sleep starts creeping up on you and it's the end of day. I'd make it so that Mom and Dad would come up every night to tuck you in and kiss your chin and make sure you're all right.
Huh.
And good night.
Oh, the end. Right.
Oh.
So I was going
Great.
to ask you, Lisette, I guess like parents everywhere, when Frank was young, you used to read to him books,
Oh,
right?
sure.
Not unlike this, right? I mean, Dr. Seuss comes to mind
Oh, yeah.
when you're reading this because of the
Yeah,
poetry.
it's very
and-
similar.
Yeah, and just the, of course, Dr. Seuss was the master of mixing whimsy with poetry, but with life lessons,
Yes.
that were very palatable to children, and of course made it
yeah.
easy for parents to convey
To
those
narrate,
lessons.
yeah.
And so, I mean, would you say he's an influence? I guess he's an influence on everybody, Dr. Seuss. On you, Frank? Or?
Yeah, I would say so. I think the greatest influence on me with respect to the children's book was when my children were very small. I would get home from work and they would wait for me to read them a story or sing them a song, which would cause one of us to fall asleep before the other.
Right, yeah.
And I would create in my mind in that moment a story to tell them, and and one in particular was called Little Brown, and it was about sea lions that lived in the Alaska area, and how this family of sea lions managed their lives through the challenges in the waters and predators and those kinds of things, and how they enjoyed themselves. And the children just loved that story, and they always encouraged me to tell the next chapter of the story.
Oh.
So it went on for years of storytelling.
That same story? Oh,
the same
different-
story.
oh.
And then other stories, and I
Oh.
would often sing to them, beginning with a line like, on this very day the snow would fall, and so on, and then there would be a story which came from that opening, as it were, and or on this very day the sun would shine, or the leaves would turn, or
Right.
something like that, and they just loved that, and I think my natural inclination to write things down eventually turned into a lot of poems. I've written almost 300 poems.
Wow.
And some of those poems, they're all in categories, and then
Right.
some are to my children in
Right.
that category, and then
Right.
there's a lot of stuff about children. So at some point I thought, well, I'll just publish some of these poems and
Right.
get an illustrator, and we'll turn it into
So now, was
something.
this one of the stories you told? Is that the genesis of the Bahia
It
House?
isn't. It
Oh, no.
It came later. I think this story was written. This poem was written in either 1999, 2001, somewhere in that area, and
Right.
they were 12, 13, 14 years old by that time.
Right. You'd be great at improv, actually.
Ah.
No, I mean because what you're saying is somebody that's not a common skill, is to be able to just tell
Or
a
have-
story as you're making it up, and
well,
tell it in a way that a child will appreciate it. So
I
that's
think
not very typical.
I think that's an
Okay.
artifice of business,
Maybe that's okay too.
just being able to create
And our
something in the
household
moment.
was always
Yeah, right. And then the end pieces, or whatever that's called, the last page of the book.
Oh, yeah.
is another poem that you wrote called After the Child.
Yeah, and this was interesting. The book obviously was written and prepared, but not finally published. And in a conversation with one of my children, I have twin girls.
Right.
They're in their 28th year. So
We should mention their names.
Ashley and Meg.
Meg.
Yeah. And I was having a conversation with one, discussing a conversation that I had with the other, and she was being very helpful in getting me to understand more about how one was thinking about this conversation. And I thought about it more, and I said, you know, I'm being influenced by my child to consider things with a different perspective than perhaps I had before.
Yeah.
And so I sat down after that conversation and wrote this poem called After the Child. And it's a simple thing, a little nuanced, but it speaks to how our children accept and forgive us almost anything, but we learn so much from them. So I'll read it to you.
Yeah,
it says,
okay.
everything I thought I knew were certain and so true, and everything I thought I knew my children let me do, and many things I thought I knew they knew were not so true, and everything I thought I knew my children would renew, till everything I thought I knew were certain and were true. And so they really are responsible. The closing line is, we're seldom the accumulation of our own making, so be guided while guiding your children.
So you mean be guided by them?
Guided by them,
Yeah.
yes, right. So we learn so much from, a teacher says that they learn more from their students than the students learn from them.
Yep.
And I think the preparation is what positions us well to do that. And as a writer, anybody who thinks about things, the comedians, the people who
Right.
write or prepare stories about nothing, like Jerry Seinfeld, right? Or Seinfeld. There's something in the nothing, but it's what everyone looks at, but only a few see.
Yeah.
And
Which really, actually,
Well,
in his case, the credit to a larger extent also goes to Larry David, who's
Yes,
his
yeah.
muse, so
Yeah.
to speak. And it's so casual, the observations people like Larry David make, which to me is part of the brilliance. The casual
sure.
observations that tickle you, inside because of the shock of recognition. You can say,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, I know exactly what he's saying."
Yeah, you can relate.
And he's able
Brings it
to
to you.
present it in such a way that you can laugh at yourself, and I mean, that's a real talent.
Exactly, yeah.
But this, as you well know, but you know enough about my recent life story, but this really resonates with me because we have a daughter, Alyssa, who's going to be a teacher, and a teacher of elementary education students, so she can read books like this. And then, of course, with our late son, Harrison, who had, he had dwarfism, but he was extraordinary in other ways. And I say that what you say in here is what I say all the time about him is the things I learned from him. Just the native wisdom are remarkable. So this really, this whole message really resonates with me. And I know, Frank, you've talked about a trilogy, actually.
Yes.
This is actually one piece of the trilogy, and let's talk about what the other pieces of the trilogy are. Yeah.
Well, with so many poems, the trilogy just sort of took its natural form because they relate in some way, in my mind at least. The second book in the trilogy is called The Least of Us, and it's about a 9-year-old boy who doesn't come from any means, but has developed a particular interest in why things are the way they are. And so he looks at hears birds and wonders how they make the sound they make.
Right.
And so he starts to mimic those birds, and he can make that sound. And then he gets to the seashore, and he tastes the water and tastes the salt in the water, and wonders over how the seas turn to salt, and
Right.
then discovers that, and then has a malt in the shop, and and wonders how those are made. You know, these are natural things
yeah.
that children do. We take for granted often many of the things.
Right.
We're not, as people were 150 years ago in this country, they made everything that they had.
Right.
If they wanted a boat to go fishing, they had to make the boat because
Right.
there weren't any manufacturers of boats. If they wanted a fishing rod, they had to hewn one,
Right.
as it were. So it's I think that the child had this natural curiosity, and he also could do something that most others can't do, even adults. He could remember your name.
Right.
And so in the end, it just really we just really say at the end of the poem that he is made, you know, as everyone, just the way God meant him to be.
Right.
Yeah. The third is a fanciful story about a little boy who wakes up in the morning and discovers that the world has turned to chocolate. And he's decided that the only thing for him to do is to eat his way through it. And it becomes an adventure of how to describe the chocolate in all things, the stairwell, the fans, the silverware, the fence pickets, the car down the road, all of those kinds of things. And it's a fun
Imagination, huh?
story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, which also reminds, of course, of another great children's author, Roald Dahl, and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory,
Yes,
which has that same kind of a theme. Yeah. And I know, certainly I know with you, you have a very penetrating curiosity about things. So what you were just describing, I could see, where that comes from. That things that other people will look at and maybe just take for granted or not think about. I know with you, you want to know how does that work and why is it the way it is, and
Always.
yeah, no, I know, I know,
It's a
and
pain.
so that's a very logical extension that I see in
Nice,
writing about
yeah.
that as well. And now, are those two books also poetry?
They are.
Yeah, the other two.
But it doesn't mean that all the books will be. I just
Right.
started a fourth children's book called Stuck, and it is not poetry. It's just a story.
Right.
And it's a story about very much what this TV program is. It's a story about how a community comes together to
Right.
solve its problems.
Right.
And it uses this family of ducks and their community, so to speak, to describe how under unusual circumstances people come together to help each other and further knit the community.
Right.
And that's what this show is meant
Yeah,
to
yeah,
do.
right. And thank you for mentioning that, because I usually do say that at the beginning of the show that that Frank Talks with Bruce the blog is all about showcasing for people, what's positive and right and true in their community, because, Frank and I feel there's not enough of that,
Same.
that is brought to people.
True.
There's just actually too much of the other type of
Right.
negative news and the things that bad people do, and so we need to hear more about
And
the
that
positive
sells.
things
That sells.
Yes, that's right. Well, yeah. So we think this sells. This sells as well. So how do you find, like, all of these ideas that you're talking about with your other works? How do they come to you? And actually, a related question is specifically with If I Were a House. From the time that the idea entered your consciousness to the time you finished it, how long does that take?
Well, usually not very long, but not because I'm especially gifted at anything. It's just that maybe I'm just have a habit of getting seized.
Well, you're disciplined is what it is.
Yeah, with the issue or the
Right.
problem, and so I give myself the time to do the things that a writer is compelled to do. I mean,
Right.
I think you feel it, then
Yeah,
you sit
right,
down
that's
and you
right.
do it.
Right.
I mean, I often wake very early in the morning with something on my mind and prepare it, usually in an outline form. And from an outline, I can put the pieces together, so to speak.
Right.
But sometimes, with poetry, it's a little more drawn out there. If you're trying to rhyme, and I tend to want to do that, especially in children's books, because the song in it is appealing to children.
Right.
It excites their musical sense, and then where else would they get that, so to speak? Than,
Yes, right.
than an exercise of their natural inclination. So poetry sometimes takes a little bit longer to manage.
Right. Well, the mechanics are different, right? In terms of,
They are too. I'm no expert in poetry. I never took a writing course.
Right.
But it's when you're a writer, you just do it.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And also, we should mention because of what Chase Media Group does. Chase Media Group has a lot of digital media products and services that we do for businesses, and so this also is an ebook, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
It's in a digital edition.
Yeah.
And how would somebody find that?
They would go to the website, which is frankjrich.com, and they can buy the book there. And there's a special introductory offer that will be going out for $5.99 for the book, which normally sells for $8.99.
Right.
And the ebook for less than that. And they can buy both the ebook, which would be delivered to them via computer, and the printed version for that price plus the shipping.
And it's on Amazon. I know your other book's on Amazon.
Yeah,
Raising Father.
I'm not sure that this one is published on Amazon yet,
Right.
but it will be.
Will be, right.
Yeah, so it just published a week ago or so. Yeah.
And what about, have you thought about something that is very popular in publishing these days, audiobooks?
I actually I didn't think much about it, but someone mentioned it to me, and so I am going to do one.
Yeah, because what you just did basically was an audiobook when you just read it on the air.
Yeah, and it's a matter of time for me. I write a weekly column for business, and those ought to all be in audio
as well. Yeah, that's right.
And
podcasts.
It's hard. It's a little just hard to find the time to do all of the things that you would like to do,
yes,
which would be helpful to people. Reading some of my columns, people might not hear the nuance that would lead them to some things that they need to do.
Right.
If they heard it,
right.
It might help.
Right.
So, yeah, sure, good suggestion.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get
and
to it.
As we're wrapping it up, because as you well know from doing the show with me as co-host, these shows go by like that, in the snap of a finger. But the last question I wanted to ask you, Frank, is you touched on it just a few minutes ago, the mechanics of writing, by which I mean, do you sit down at, let's say, appointed times and start writing, or the sort of the cliche sometimes with writers is, I'll get up in the middle of the night if they have an idea and just start writing, because like you said, when the idea seizes you, you need to commit it to paper.
Well, for something like this is a poem. It's rather short. Even a short story doesn't take all that much if it's 2.5, 3 pages. But the second novel, which I'm into, 130 pages, that requires a discipline.
Right.
And so the goal is to publish it in 2013.
Right.
I'm had I not prepared 130 pages before 2013, I'm halfway through and I haven't really done much on it. So it does really require some discipline to write. If you could get 2 to 5 pages a day every time that you write on it, then you can accumulate.
Right, you're on a good pace.
But what's the formula? I don't know.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
Just natural.
It's a secret sauce, and I know you're also a gourmet or a chef, so I know that the secret sauce, I guess, applies to what you do in terms of writing as well.
I'm more accurately a cook.
Oh, okay. Well,
not
I
a
taste
chef.
your food. It's very good to me, anyhow. Thanks, Frank J. Rich, author of If I Were a House and Raising Father and other books to come, for being with us, and to his mom, Lisette Rich. Thank you for being here. And you have been watching Frank Talks.
Pleasure.
With Bruce the Blog, Talks with Frank, a special edition of our show, you might say. Thanks for watching, and remember, when Bruce the Blog listens, people talk.